Good afternoon. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our ILMU Hasanah titled Breakthrough Stories of Hope, Resilience and Mental Health Recovery. Kindly take your seats. Selamat sejahtera to all. Esteemed speaker, Professor Dr. Ahmed Hankir. If I may say so myself, Doctor, you're looking dashing in our traditional, is that Malaysian batik? Amazing. Amazing, fantastic. Where did you get it from? It's a gift from Kyrie. Amazing. Now, hello and welcome to moderator. Thank you so much. Moderator Miss Nadia Hanim. Hello. Managing Director will soon join us, Positi Kamaria. Hasanah Senior Leadership Team, distinguished guests and partners and friends of Yayasan Hasanah. We are so very glad and happy that you could join us here today. My name is Hanis Hisham, Senior Manager here of the Strategic Communications Team at Yayasan Hasanah. Now, before we begin, a bit of introduction. Allow us to introduce ourselves. Who is Yayasan Hasanah? So we are Yayasan Hasanah, the foundation of Khazanah Nasional Berhad. This year, Hasanah enters its 10th year in the philanthropic sector, a decade of impact. With our incredible partners, some are here with us today. We've touched the lives of 2.9 million people in Malaysia across all layers of society, alhamdulillah, making a positive difference in areas of education, community development, arts and public spaces, environment and knowledge, all pillars to nation building. And why are we gathered here today? The ILMU series organized by Hasanah are our knowledge sharing events that we host for our civil society partners, stakeholders, as well as members of the public. Now here we have a range of topics led by sectoral experts and thought leaders that we see here today. At Hasanah, we believe that continuous learning is essential, and for everyone, there should be no barriers to learning. And today marks our 38th ILMU session, so thank you. Give it up to our knowledge team. So what can you expect for the next couple hours? Today's agenda begins with opening remarks from our Chief Education Officer, Dr. Anwar Abdul Muttalib, who will also be introducing our esteemed speaker and moderator. This will be followed by a sharing session with Professor Dr. Ahmed Hankir, author of Breakthrough, a Story of Hope, Resilience and Mental Health Recovery. Moderated by, of course, Miss Nadia Hanim. Together, they will explore the intersection of mental health advocacy and social justice as Dr. Ahmed shares his personal breakthroughs in advocating for mental health and wellness, striving for a more equitable and compassionate society. And afterward, we will have an exclusive Q&A session. So be sure you have your burning questions ready, followed by a book signing session. Please stay for light refreshments afterwards. You won't want to miss it. So, one simple question for everyone. Are we ready? Amazing. Without further ado, I invite Dr. Anwar Abdul Muttalib to begin.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Hanis. Our esteemed speaker, Dr. Ahmed Hankir, whom I first met about 2 weeks ago online. Our moderator and old friend, Nadia, thank you for agreeing to moderate this session this afternoon. Our special guest, Kyrie Jamaluddin, KJ, a pleasant surprise to have you here, and we are so happy having the ex-Minister of Health together with us on this very important topic. And on a personal note, I think as on behalf of Malaysians, I would like to thank KJ for having established NCMH, National Center of Excellence for Mental Health. So in the many talk sessions that we go to, we always mention NCMH as one of the pinnacle breakthrough in our country. Not many countries has a national center of excellence for mental health, and we had the opportunity to visit them and see the awesome work that the people there are doing for our mental health patients in this country. YH squad team, YH partners, and I see a lot of new faces here today, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 38th ILMU session that we try to host at least minimum of 4 sessions a year, if not more. Good afternoon, salam sejahtera, assalamualaikum. I am especially excited to be here with you. I just returned from Finland yesterday evening. Somewhat a little jet lag, but I'm really looking forward to our session today. And thank you to Dr. Ahmed Hankir from Toronto, a country where it's close to my heart because I spent 4 years studying in that winterland of Canada. Let me just say a few words because I just returned from Finland. There are three things I would like to share with you pertaining to Finland as the happiest country in the world for 7 consecutive years, followed closely by their neighbors Denmark and Iceland. And during the trip, I did take the opportunity to dive a little deeper on the topic of education and mental health among students. And in summary, these are just the 3 things that was widely mentioned, not by one person, but the many people whom we got to meet in Helsinki as well as in Oulu, that may contribute to the well-being of Finnish students and teachers. 1, very high quality of free education from preschool to university. And in Finland, the children there, they start daycare with proper syllabus and education and things that the children needs to do in play form as early as 9 months old. And in Finland, there is no dead end in the Finnish education system. If you make a wrong turn, there are same opportunities on other routes. So there isn't any dead end in the Finnish education system. For mental health, there is a school well policy where psychologists, doctors, and counselors work directly with teachers in school. Because the education in Finland is under the municipality. It is not under Jabatan Pendidikan Negeri. Jabatan Pendidikan Negeri comes under the municipality, which is pejabat daerah lah kat sini. So everything is under the municipality that includes education. So all the other services are provided within this municipal. Secondly, trust. And again, this was widely spoken. There is a deep trust in teachers, principals, and school. There is flexibility for teachers to interpret the curriculum and design their own lessons. Lessons are delivered in 45-minute blocks. 45 minutes followed by 15-minute break, where the students can go out and play and and rest and come back for the next 45-minute blocks. And for example, a teacher shared with us that she teaches Anne Frank. Are you familiar with Anne Frank? Yeah, about the World War II and Holocaust and this girl. And she was teaching Anne Frank to the first graders. You may think Anne Frank is a very heavy subject. You know, if it was here, maybe Form 4, Form 5. But she adapted Anne Frank and taught it to the first graders and showed movies. And what's important is the values that the story brings out. So it was quite, I wouldn't imagine trying to teach Anne Frank to primary schoolers, but she's doing it with the first graders. And thirdly, students in Finland are happy to go to school. There is a student first and joy in learning policies in place. For example, they have this policy, 0 tolerance to student learning. 0 tolerance means that 0 tolerance to student learning. 0 tolerance means that 0 tolerance to student learning. 0 tolerance means that 0 tolerance to student learning. 0 tolerance means that 0 tolerance to student learning. 0 tolerance means that 0 tolerance to student learning. 0 tolerance means that 0 tolerance to student learning. 0 tolerance means that 0 tolerance to student learning. 0 tolerance means that 0 tolerance to student learning. 0 tolerance means that 0 tolerance to student learning. 0 tolerance means that 0 tolerance to student learning. 0 tolerance means that 0 tolerance to student learning. 0 tolerance means that 0 tolerance to student learning. 0 tolerance means that 0 tolerance to student learning. 0 tolerance means that 0 tolerance to student learning. 0 tolerance means that 0 tolerance to student learning. 0 tolerance means that 0 tolerance to student learning. 0 tolerance means that 0 tolerance to student learning. 0 A Finnish student never misses lessons just because the teacher is not there. Cikgu pergi mesyuarat, cikgu pergi, taking students out for sports, but the lesson continues in the classroom. There is no such thing as your kids coming home and saying, Papa, we didn't do anything for this lesson. There is always lessons going on and zero tolerance policy to student learning. So those are the three things, and perhaps contributes to the well-being of students in Finland, where we can definitely learn from them. Of course, I can spend quite easily a few hours to share about the Finnish system, but that is not the reason why we are here today. Today, we are here to learn, appreciate, and celebrate the life of our esteemed speaker, Dr. Ahmed Hankir. And Nadia, my old friend and moderator today, will introduce him later, so I will not take the limelight from you, Nadia. Just a little note on Hasanah, on what we do under the education pillar. For mental health, we've done quite a bit. We've reached thousands of students. 2023 alone, more than 5,800 students around the country for teachers, mental health and psychosocial first aid support. But what's more important to us is how do we raise the awareness on the importance of mental health amongst our students. Because what we hear when we speak to students is that they don't understand what they see when they see their friends having depression, having anxiety, starting to cut themselves. They have no idea what they are seeing, and they have no idea how they can render support to their colleagues. So we are trying to raise that awareness among students on the importance of mental health and preventative measures. So that's what we are trying to do all over the country. Just a quick one. Last year, I had the opportunity to share a stage with a speaker from Singapore who is living and recovering from mental health disorders. It was a profound session listening to him sharing his trauma and insights into mental health, something that he had lived and still living through it. For me, it was truly an eye-opening, earth-shattering session, something we can never get from reading books or by speaking to school counselors. It also provided me with questions as well as assurance on the work that we are trying to do over here at Hasanah. Today, we are here with Dr. Ahmed Hankir. When we first spoke, I did mention to Dr. Ahmed about persons living and recovering with mental health conditions. And his reply to me, and he had corrected me, in my case, he said, the word is thriving. It is not just living or recovering from it. He's thriving. And this shows how much Dr. Ahmed has progressed from the Lebanon war to where he is today. And I also learned from his book that Dr. Ahmed has a twin brother. So just in case you bump into someone who looks like him, it's very and his name is Dr. Mohammed, if I'm not mistaken. Dr. Mohammed, yes. Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, mental health is definitely a critical issue, not only globally, but especially here in Malaysia. Statistics show that Malaysians aged 16 and above, 1 in 5 are facing mental health issues. So with that in mind, this is one of the reasons why we took this opportunity to have Dr. Ahmed with us today. And on this note, I would like to extend our heartfelt thanks to Alicia from ThriveWell, as well as Anita from Miasa. Who had put us together with Dr. Ahmed and for us to have this session with him today. We are truly grateful for all their efforts in making this session possible. Once again, on behalf of Yayasan Hasanah and the Hasanah squad, thank you for being here. And without further ado, I hand the session over to our moderator, Nadia, and Dr. Ahmed to begin today's session, Breakthrough, Stories of Hope, Resilience, and Recovery. Thank you.
All right. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good afternoon, everyone. It's a real honor to be here today among many familiar faces and good friends. So distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and those who are watching us online. I believe we also have guests who are watching us online. So terima kasih kerana bersama kami pada tengah hari ini. So I'm going to do a bit of a rojak because I think if the session is too formal, it'll be quite stiff, right, for those who are watching online. And since the topic is such a deep and thought-provoking topic, I think it'll be nice for us to keep the conversation casual so that we can deep dive into some of the things that we want to discuss today. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I think Dr. Ahmed Hankir does not require any further introduction. I think a lot of us are not only familiar with his work, but eagerly anticipating and waiting for this session to happen. But for the interest of everyone that's watching, allow me to read a little bit his bio. So Dr. Ahmed Hankir is a renowned consultant, psychiatrist, advocate, and researcher specializing in mental health stigma, as well as social justice. His journey from breakdown to breakthrough has shaped him into the leading voice in the field, emphasizing on the vital link between mental health advocacy as well as social justice. He has delivered captivating speeches at prestigious events, including TEDx. He's also a visiting researcher and a fellow in many universities, both abroad in the West and hopefully more here in upcoming times, inshallah. And his research interest includes global and Muslim mental health and developing innovative intervention against mental health stigma and Islamophobia. So without further ado, maybe let's go straight into it. Dr. Hankir, what inspired you to even get into this field of psychiatry, psychology, understanding trauma and mental health? So perhaps over to you, a little bit on your background first.
Well, thank you for that kind introduction. And I want to thank Hasanah, all the people that made this happen. I want to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I want to thank all of you attending this talk. I want to thank Emily as well for helping to organize this event, even though you were in hospital for the most part. I want to thank my brother Khairi, KJ. Right, okay, God. I'm feeling inspired. And when I feel inspired, I'm very spontaneous. I have a license to be spontaneous, but I don't brandish it because that would be a vulgar display of power. So I'm passionate about harnessing the power of the performing arts and storytelling to humanize and dignify persons living with a mental health condition, because we are more than being stigmatized. We are being dehumanized and brutalized. And I often say this: a story is data with soul. A story is data with soul, and you can engage both the mind and the heart by harnessing the power of storytelling. Also, I don't know, do we have any psychiatrists in the room here? Yeah? No? Any psychiatrists? Yeah? Okay. Put your prescription pad away. Put your prescription pad away, I say. I'm not anti-medication. I'm not anti-medication. I'm just anti-prescribing powerful psychiatric drugs when it's not necessary. Also, I say, who needs psychiatric drugs when I can deliver a performance every now and then? So it's the, and there's some truth in that, the power of the performing arts. I discovered, to answer your question, I discovered how utterly beholden we are to the power and the mercy of our minds when I was in a mental health crisis. And it was rock bottom for me. It was the loneliest, most isolated and afraid and I've ever felt in my entire life. And in my despair, I contemplated ending that which is most precious, human life itself. I was feeling suicidal. I know this is a taboo topic, but we need to talk about this. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, as a practicing Muslim, suicide is forbidden in Islam, it's haram, and so that deterred me from acting upon that seductive suicidal impulse. And I eventually sought informal support from my imam in my local masjid in Manchester. Any Man United supporters here? Thank you, KJ. Boo! Hey, FA Cup winners, 2024. So I eventually sought informal support from my imam in my local masjid in Manchester, and he urged me to seek professional help. He didn't just say, you should pray some more, or you should read some more Quran. We should do these things. We should do these things. But it's not enough. We need to be holistic. And so I sought help from a consultant psychiatrist, and together we co-created a care plan grounded on a human rights framework. And that was the start of my recovery. And I always wanted to help people. I'm a dreamer. And to quote Professor Egon Dix-Falusi at the Karolinski Institute, the medical and the scientific problems of this world cannot be solved by skeptics whose horizons are narrowed by practical realities. We need women and men who dream of things that cannot be and ask why not. And I was dreaming dreams that no mortal ever dared to dream before. Quoth the raven, nevermore. So I was dreaming to help people. And I thought, wow, this psychiatrist helped me. I want to be a psychiatrist because I think that would be an opportunity for me to help others. So I hope that answers your question.
No, I think it opened up to even more questions.
Great, okay.
That's fantastic. Several things that you mentioned that I think really kind of stood out for me. One of the things that Dr. Anwar earlier mentioned about the global health pandemic when we're talking about mental health, just at the WHA last week in Geneva, people were talking about over 400 million people living with some form of mental health disorders or challenges. But you mentioned several words. You said you were hit with extreme loneliness, isolation, and trying to find that way out of that seductive whisper of maybe it's just a lot easier to just end it all. And I think every single one of us in this room, especially if you are leading an NGO or leading a CSO, very often what happens is there are a lot of eyes and a lot of expectations for us to always be with it, knowing exactly what to do, knowing what needs to happen. I can only imagine what it means for a minister of health during the pandemic, what it meant for everybody to assume that, okay, if anyone has the answer, it has to be him. And the amount of pressure of 32.8 million people, not trying to make it worse, but, it's tough. For you in your journey from recovery to finding that imam to meeting someone who really could help you, what were some of the several aha moments that told you, okay, I'm on the right track. This is something that I think is not only going to be helping me, but really, inspire and help so many others.
Like an epiphany. Several epiphanies. I mean, for a long time I was in denial. And in my book, I talk about the insight switch suddenly turning on. And I was living in this squalid, dilapidated terrace house in Moss Side, which is the roughest area in Manchester. And I was so overwhelmed. I beheld the conflagration in my wake, because whilst the bridges in Lebanon were burning literally, I was burning bridges in the metaphorical sense with people who I thought at the time were my closest companions. And the damage was so extensive and seemingly beyond repair. I don't care if this shatters my masculine bravado, because we need to rewrite the narrative on what it means to be a strong man, a strong person, and expressing our emotions and seeking help are signs of strength and not signs of weakness. And at that moment of realization, that moment when the insight switch suddenly turned on, I cried inconsolably. But that was arguably the starting point. Because when I accepted that I was at the throes of a major depressive disorder, I could then begin my recovery. And recovery is a slow, gradual, and painful process, which took many years for me. So I think that was an epiphany. But I wanted to talk about some of the statistics that you shared. I mean, the World Health Organization, according to WHO, 1 in 4 of us at some point will experience a mental health condition. If it's not you, it's likely someone you know who is suffering from a mental health condition. It's not only possible, it's probable. But what keeps me up at night, what breaks my heart, is that many persons living with a mental health condition continue to suffer in silence despite the availability of effective treatment. I repeat, many persons living with a mental health condition continue to suffer in silence despite the availability of effective treatment. And I love sharing this story, and with Khairi's permission, I'm going to share this story again. In my acceptance speech at the World Health Organization World Health Assembly in 2022 in Geneva, I remember being on that world stage, and I was speaking to health ministers, and I was speaking to world leaders, and I wasn't intimidated. And I said to them all, I don't care. I don't care if you are a health minister, if you are a world leader. You are a human being, and that means you are vulnerable to developing mental health problems like everyone else. And I know for a fact that there are people in this room who are suffering in silence. And that's why I'm outraged. That's why I'm indignant. That's why there's a fire burning in my belly and there's thunder in my heart to contribute to this cultural revolution that empowers and dignifies and humanizes people living with a mental health condition. So I'm inviting you to stand in solidarity with us to break down these barriers to mental health care services for people who urgently need them. Thank you, Ibs.
So I think what you just mentioned about being shattered and overwhelmed, and that being the kickstart, or at least the beginning of your journey, reminds me of Khalil Gibran's Prophet, where he's talking about the deeper the sorrow carves into your soul, the more joy it can contain.
The more melancholy carves into your being, the more jubilation it can contain. And even the beauty of birth, the beauty of birth leaves its own scars.
So I'm going to quote you. You've said this on X, so I thought it would be good for everyone to know. He says, if living with a mental health condition has taught me anything, it's that the cognitive capacity of the mind to receive and to conceive ideas is something that should never, ever be taken for granted. There have been periods in my life during which my mind was so shattered that it was unable to comprehend and concentrate and to produce any meaningful and coherent thoughts. Reading a book, let alone writing one, would have been an impossible task during those times. And this was you talking about your book, Breakthrough, A Story of Hope. Now, before we go into that, the impetus of what made you start writing this book, it was really goosebumps reading about what you've written here, because to your point about the suffering in silence, I think one of the key issues that most of us have is the acceptance that something is not okay, and the fact that it's actually okay to not be okay. Especially with societal expectations that, you know, men don't cry, or women should be naturally nurturing, or you should naturally know exactly what's supposed to happen. Realizing that I actually have no idea what's happening, where to go, and I feel completely, in your words, deconflagrated earlier. How do you deal with that sense of complete and utter helplessness and accepting that before you're able to ask for help? Because to your point, I dare say, if we're going to ask for a show of hands, nobody's going to, probably not many going to raise their hands. But in silence, they're probably going to say, I need help, but I don't know where to go. And I need help, but I don't know what's the first step. What was the first step for you? And how do you foresee the first step can be for many other people in this room?
The first step, so many thoughts crossed my mind. I mean, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, I'm a Muslim. And so I am a believer. And what rendered me vulnerable to finding myself in a mental health crisis was being disconnected from my Creator. And so by reconnecting with my Creator and reminding myself that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most merciful. If I turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with a mountain of sins, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will turn to me with a mountain of forgiveness. And don't forget, you develop that kind of excessive guilt, which immobilizes you. And you don't think that you are worthy of compassion. You don't think that you are worthy of treatment. And so you punish yourself. But by reminding myself that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most merciful, and He loves to forgive those who repent with sincerity. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, please forgive me for the sinner that I am. That in a way helped to plant the seeds of sakina in my heart, mind, body, and soul. So that was one of the first things that I did, to show myself the same kind of love and compassion that I would do to others. And I think many of us struggle with that. The social connectivity is really important. You don't have to be a Muslim, a practicing Muslim. You can go to your synagogue, you can go to a church, you can go to a temple, but that social connectivity, the importance of which cannot be overstated. Who do you think I'm seeing at 2 o'clock in the morning in the emergency department at St. Thomas Hospital in central London in a mental health crisis? I get a phone call from the psychiatric liaison nurse, and she'll say, Dr. Hankir, we have a patient here, they just jumped off London Bridge, they are suicidal, you have to come now and see them. I'm seeing people who are disconnected, like I was once disconnected. I'm seeing people who have lost all hope, who succumb to despair. And they don't, it's not so much the quantity of those social connections, by the way, it's the quality. And these people don't have one high quality social connection. And that's heartbreaking. So that social connectivity is crucial. And by going to your local masjid, for example, you can make those connections. Also, lifestyle interventions. To emphasize, I'm not anti-medication, I'm anti-prescribing powerful psychiatric drugs when it's not necessary. I think the threshold for bringing up our prescription pads out is too low. I think there's so much we can do before we prescribe medication. And there are things that we can do whilst taking medication. Increasing your physical activity, improving your diet, your nutrition. I mean, I don't take any medication, and I live with a severe mental illness or an SMI. And what contributes to my mental health resilience is my lifestyle. I mean, alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen, me and KJ, we went for a run yesterday, 10 kilometers. I go for a 15-kilometer run every morning. And I do that because I know if I don't, my mental health is going to suffer. And then obviously diet as well. And I think it is a major issue here, isn't it, KJ? Was it NCDs? Yeah, we have to improve our diet, everyone. I know the food here is delicious. I understand that. And it has been so tempting. And I have relented. I can't deny it. But we have to be careful with what we eat. There is a relationship between gut health and brain health. And then the performing arts. The performing arts. I'm not exaggerating. That can literally be life-saving. You know, spoken word poetry. I mean, that's what the Wounded Healer is. I developed the Wounded Healer, which has been described as an innovative method of teaching that blends the power of the performing arts and storytelling with psychiatry. I mean, how can we educate an audience if you can't engage them? And when you entertain them, that's when you engage them. And when you engage them, that's when you can educate them. Are you ready for a teaser, a Wounded Healer teaser? Yeah? Yes. You want to know how the performing arts contributes to my mental health resilience? Okay, brace yourselves. It's theatrical. Don't say I didn't warn you. Okay, so where are we? We are in the bazaar in the Arabian Peninsula. We are in the bazaar. I'm going to transport you to a different time and place. In the bazaar in the Arabian Peninsula, merchants have traveled from far and wide to barter frankincense and silk. The marketplace is heaving with people. But wait just one moment. There's some commotion in the corner. The poet has taken to the pulpit. Bread and water do the poets have in Hakim's house, where verse and prose are nightly put to slaughter. And the bread, I swear, over there, it's thinner than the water. Open a space, you lovers of poetry. To KJ, willing and rich, patron of the arts. When KJ invites the poet in, their joyous kith and love is kin. Where wines and cakes abound, the skills of verse are found. All revels and all songs begin when KJ invites the poet in. So that's an insight into what I call drama therapy, and that's what contributes to my mental health resilience.
Okay, after this, we're going to have a session where everybody will stand up and we'll do a, you know, like a little bit of an improv.
Or we can sing as well.
Oh, we can sing as well. Thank you for that. Can we please give him a big round of applause? So, back to what you were talking about in terms of social connection. I believe all of us felt that connection earlier. The social connectivity and the lifestyle intervention. Okay, we know that Malaysia, with its amazing food, is quite a challenging nation with diabetes. But that aside, talk back to the social connectivity. You talked about your faith anchoring you and being able to help you understand that when there is a spiral, that spiral is not necessarily endless. Now, I've had the opportunity to, well, maybe a little bit of background. Being with the Malaysian Rare Disorder Society means we have 7,000 different types of rare diseases, many of them who face many different types of, from stigma to ill health to mental health disorders, especially caregivers, right? And that feeling of endless spiral that even if I were to go and see a doctor, even if I were to go and see an imam, even if I were to go and see a monk, nobody's going to be able to truly understand what I'm going through. For you, your social connectivity was really to speak to a higher creator, not necessarily someone who you meet in person who'd be able to understand you 100%. For the young, because my other hat is in child protection, so I'm actually part of the team that helped to set up the child helpline that your children will call to if they're lonely or if they're hopefully not harming themselves. A lot of them are calling to say, I'm lonely and I can't speak to my parents. I'm lonely, there's no one to speak to. And I'm inspired by what Dr. Anwar said, that, you know, when we're talking about no wrong turns, right from a very young age, we need to be able to teach our young in Malaysia and all across the world that, you know, there are moments that you feel deep sadness, but we don't teach people how to cope. We just teach them how to excel. In your journey and in the patients that you've met, and perhaps, you know, taking from the book that you've written, how have you been able to connect to maybe younger individuals, I don't like to call them patients, individuals living with mental health challenges, to be able to break it down to them? You said Ayn Frank was a very, you know, difficult topic to learn, but mental health is something that we should understand right from the time we can, you know, utter words, or even before we can utter words. So in your experience, seeing individuals, seeing patients, what has worked for you?
I mean, I've given talks to younger people, fortunately, throughout the world, and younger people, they continue to inspire me. I mean, look what's happening with these encampments, right, in the universities. This might be controversial, but there is this goth artist.
Okay, write that down. Goth artist.
This goth artist, his name is Marilyn Manson. So a lot of people think, oh, you just dismiss what he says, because how on earth could he possibly say anything that is beneficial for anyone? We vilify him, right? And I'll never forget this. In the documentary from Michael Moore, Fahrenheit 9/11, no, Bowling for Columbine, Michael Moore interviews Marilyn Manson. And he says, what would you say to these younger people, these children who are in pain, who are lonely, who are disconnected, who are isolated? What would you say to them? And I don't know if you remember his response. Marilyn Manson said, I wouldn't say a word. I would sit down and I would listen to what they have to say. So listen. Listen to our younger people. Provide them with a platform to express themselves. Don't tell me a younger person doesn't want to talk. Every younger person wants to speak. Just give them that opportunity. Sometimes you create these walls not to keep people out, because we want to discover who has the will to climb over them, who has the will to break these walls down. Make yourself emotionally available to younger people. Understand their pain. Connect with them. Empower them. Dignify them. Don't take hope away from them, because sometimes hope is all they have left. Talk to them on a level. Don't talk down to them. Emulate our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. How the youth loved him and gravitated towards him, because he would always dignify them. So, I mean, those are my initial thoughts, really. Just don't be so, I guess, condescending and patronizing, and Yeah, don't place yourself on a pedestal, but talk to them on a level, and they'll remember you for the rest of their lives. I remember the older people, the adults, who used to treat me with kindness and respect and dignity when I was younger. So those are my initial thoughts.
It might sound simple, but it's not easy to do, right? I think in many times, especially in different cultures, in different parts of the world, children are often meant to be seen, not necessarily heard. But I think what he's saying is spot on, not only about the power of listening, but you're talking about kindness and dignity. And I think that's something that we all want, but we don't necessarily always give to someone else. So thank you for that. Maybe let's go a little bit more to your work and the contributions that you're doing. So what exciting projects are you working on right now? And perhaps even how can we get involved?
Yeah. So I'm really passionate about, it's not reducing stigma. I want to go beyond stigma reduction. I want to reject stigma. And we are living in the digital age, and we must respect and harness the power of social media and collaborate with influencers. And so I'm really interested in the brief video interventions, because unfortunately our attention span has become fragmented. So this actually might betray how old I am. You know that film by Tom, he acted in the film, Tom Cruise, Jerry Maguire? Yeah? You remember that famous scene when all the wives were assembled, well, they gathered and they started complaining about how terrible our husbands are, and then Tom Cruise, bursts into the room looking very handsome, and he launches into this kind of soliloquy, this monologue, and she says, "Shut up! You had me at hello." It's a terrible Renee Zellweger impersonation, I know, but you get the point. You got to get them at hello. That's how narrow that window of opportunity is to engage with people and reject the stigma. And so we need these brief video interventions that we can post on TikTok or YouTube Shorts, because that, to emphasize that window of opportunity has become so narrow. And there's a fascinating study, I was talking to Anita about this, published in the American Journal of Psychiatry. It was a randomized study. It was a brief video intervention, the protagonist of which is an African-American woman living with schizophrenia. And it was associated with sustained reductions in stigma. This is unprecedented. Usually we have immediate reductions in stigma. We don't have sustained reductions. And so what were the key ingredients? Well, the protagonist is an African-American woman living with schizophrenia. And she is humanizing persons living with a mental health condition. Because when you meet us, when you make contact with us, social contact, people who are attending via, I don't know, is it Zoom or something? That's virtual contact. When you make contact with us, you discover that we are law-abiding, community-serving, peace-loving citizens, and that we have hopes and fears and strengths and dreams and vulnerabilities like everyone else. You discover we are human beings. Just give us a chance. Meet us. Make contact with us. And so that was one of the key ingredients, humanizing persons living with a mental health condition. 2 was identification, because the protagonist was talking about the emotional turmoil that she experiences. Are you telling me that there's someone in this room who hasn't experienced emotional turmoil? We can all identify with that. There was that identification. Humanization, identification, and the third one was engagement. How do we engage? Through the power of storytelling. We engage the mind and the heart. So we are in the process of developing a brief video intervention, the protagonist of which is a Malaysian person living with a mental health condition. This has never been done before, and we are open to collaborations with persons, especially persons living with a mental health condition, because at the moment it's everything about us without us, and it should be nothing about us without us. We have voices, we can speak for ourselves, and we will be heard.
Agree, kan? When you were talking about galvanizing the power of social media, I think KJ here has definitely done that with his multi-podcast series. At the same time, I think social media is almost like a double-edged sword. While it's a fantastic place to advocate for stuff, we also have things like cancel culture. We have extreme violence online. a happy trivia to share. The majority of anti-social, violent, pornographic material that are related to children are actually produced by children themselves for other children to consume. So it's a minefield now.
It is, and we have to navigate carefully.
And I like the fact that you're talking about counterspeak. So in a country like Malaysia, where we have more people online than the number of population, what are some of the things that we can do to counterspeak? We actually do. The number of people with social media accounts plus combined is actually more than. So how do we counterspeak, create better narratives so that there's more online if you're going to search? Because the reality of it is the algorithm's going to give you what you want. So if a child looks for how to cut myself, if an adult talks about ways to kill myself while live streaming, that's probably what you're going to get, and more of it. How do we tackle that?
I mean, I have a chapter devoted in my book about social media. It's called Dancing in the Dark. Because for a long time I was dancing in the dark, and then my best friend Wasim said, you've got to create an account on social media, and that's how I connected with like-minded and like-hearted people all over the world. So without a doubt, it has its benefits.
Yes.
But there are also pitfalls. There are also perils. And we know that online abuse can be harmful and can contribute to suicidal behaviors. So we can't be naive and we can't be oblivious to this. I think that tech companies need to take more responsibility. I think more research needs to be conducted. More resources need to be allocated on research on the harmful effects that social media can have on our mental health. I think there needs to be more accountability. Perpetrators of online abuse and harassment need to be held accountable. Unfortunately, we live in a world where perpetrators are protected and victims are punished. And there needs to be more specialist support for victims of online abuse and harassment. So it can be an unforgiving place. It can be a minefield. We have to navigate carefully. I think there needs to be more teaching in schools, in primary schools. I think we need to moderate as well, because we can become addicted. Many of us are using our smartphones now. Because, and I mean, life is what happens when we're busy using our smartphones, right? So put your smartphones away. And I'm talking to myself as well, because, you know, you get that kind of withdrawal symptoms, do you? That's not healthy. You know, less screen time, more immersing yourself in nature. So, yeah, I think it should be compulsory, teaching at primary school level. I think we need to also moderate, regulate, and also normalize not feeling guilty about disabling your notifications, because doom scrolling can be very harmful for our mental health. And, you know, all these notifications about the horrors taking place in Gaza at the moment, that can be harmful for it is harmful for our mental health. It's traumatic, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. But I understand, because we can feel conflicted, because on the one hand, we feel like it's incumbent upon us. It's our duty to know about what's happening. We need to be informed at the very least. But yet, on the other hand, it can be harmful for our mental health. So I think we need to have some more guidance as well from mental health care professionals. Unfortunately, mental health care professionals, psychiatrists, are not showing leadership in the social media spaces, and that's being occupied by well-meaning mental health advocates. And there's a distinction. Although the two are often conflated, there's a distinction between a mental health advocate and a mental health care professional. So we failed, the profession has failed, because we're not showing leadership in these spaces, and we should, because we know that social media can be beneficial for our mental health because of the social connectivity, but it can also be harmful as well. So we need more guidance. And
I think I'd add one more to the point of those that are actually using social media as a platform need to also be aware of that power dynamics. Because you earlier mentioned that, you know, when a patient or an individual comes to see a doctor, there's that power dynamic in trying to believe or understand or take in whatever that healthcare professional or healthcare or a clinician is saying. So for those who are actually using social media as a platform to engage, find ways and means that reach and connect to people without having to necessarily talk down to them or saying that this is actually an issue, right? And I think we see a lot of that.
We do, absolutely. And unfortunately, from members of the psychiatric profession, and that needs to change. I mean, there are many inspirational psychiatrists, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
Caring, compassionate, but some of the most vitriolic attacks that I've been the victim of have come from members of the psychiatric profession,
I
unfortunately.
think from the rare disease community, we can speak firsthand from meeting many doctors that may not necessarily have the best bedside manners.
No,
So-
that's the thing. No, but I mean, unfortunately, the profession does attract persons who have narcissistic tendencies. No, I mean, I'll say it.
Yeah.
It does, and we need more humility in medicine and psychiatry in our world. Instead of placing ourselves on these pedestals, we need to connect people on a more human, authentic level.
And you said engage instead of empower, so thank you for that. Perhaps in the next few minutes, I wanted to ask you to share a little bit about the amazing book that you've written and what are some of the, if you haven't already gotten your book, please do. He will be here for signing in a bit. But perhaps what inspired you to write the book and what are some of the best parts of that journey in writing the book?
It's a blessing. And you read out my tweet, didn't you? I mean, the mind's cognitive capacity to receive and to conceive ideas is something that we should never, ever take for granted. And when people ask me this question, I reply by saying, breakthrough, my book, it was always in my mind and in my heart, but it felt like it was trapped. And I moved to Ontario, Canada last year. And I prayed Salat al-Istikhara. And I continued to pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to purify my intentions. And I begged Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that if moving to Canada is better for me in my deen, then make it easy for me. And alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it easy for me. For He has power over all things and He is the best of planners. And I remember I would walk to London Muslim Mosque, which is everything that a masjid should be. It's a community center. It has a school, it has a gym, everything. It would take me 90 minutes to walk to the masjid for Fajr. And there's no better way to start your day, by the way. There is no better way, and I'm reminding myself, there is no better way to start your day than to pray to your Creator, especially if you can do that in the masjid, in congregation. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I was inspired. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enlightened me, and using my smartphone, I composed my book on the way to the masjid, on the way back. And I did that in 4 weeks. And looking back, I don't know how I did it. So that, because I'm a believer, it's divine intervention. I was inspired to write the book. And it was empowering. Of course it was. It was reclaiming the narrative. But I didn't want this to be about me. I remember when I met Anthony Joshua, the former heavyweight champion of the world, and he kept on asking me what inspired me because I delivered an acceptance speech. It was a speech that moved tears to many an eye. It moved men's hearts, the chroniclers would later write. Of course I would say that, wouldn't I? And I said to him, what inspired me was, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, before delivering my acceptance speech, I excused myself and I prayed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I placed my forehead on the ground. And the former heavyweight champion of the world, whose bicep is bigger than my thigh, said to me that you humble me. He said that you humble me. And the reason why I mention this is, divine intervention. Divine intervention. So AJ said, can you share a quote with me? And I quoted Muhammad Ali. Me, we. And then I shared another quote. When you replace I with we, instead of mental illness, you get mental wellness? Yeah. So that's what this book is about. I want this book to be a companion because I know what life is like when you have lost all hope and when you succumb to despair and when you are disconnected and isolated and lonely. And I hope my book makes you feel less alone and less afraid and that it plants the seeds of hope into your heart, mind, body, and soul. I pray it does. And also because it's as if we should be satisfied with surviving. I don't just want to survive. I want to thrive. I want to realize my dreams. Why not? Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen.
And I think it's amazing because when we say thriving, in many different aspects, including sustainability, when we're talking about living within the confines of what the planet already has and social structures and constructs that we already have, thriving is exactly what we're trying to aim for. Because the reality of it is progress doesn't mean continuously more and more and more and more and no end. There is an end, and thriving is finding that balance between what we have and how we can behave in sync with everything else around us. So thank you so much for highlighting that. Perhaps one last question before we open it up to the floor and those who are watching online.
Sure.
There are a lot of mental health advocacy and CSO NGO leaders here who I'm sure are as inspired as I am of everything that you've just said. What would I suppose your message be to them in their journey in trying to ensure that when you feel that you don't have any more to give and you are running on empty and your tank is not only on fuel warning, engine dah berasap, right? Your engine's about to combust.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that we can do better as leaders to also understand, appreciate, and accept our own limitations? To your point, you said humility. And this does not necessarily mean that you need to believe in a specific faith, but humility can transcend across whatever faith systems that you have. What are some of the ways that we can ensure that we have a community and a network that continues to support ourselves so that the room here becomes a network that thrives and continues to assist each other even after the session?
It's only human to burn out if you are living in the fast lane for so long, and you run out of gas. The tank can run out of gas, and that's what happened with Jacinda Ardern, for example. She embraced her vulnerability, and she just said it. There's no more gas left in the tank. And that's nothing to be ashamed of. So I think it's knowing when you are out of your depth, and knowing your limits. But Khairi said this yesterday when we went to the National Center for Excellence for Mental Health. Sometimes when you invite an external speaker, they can be disruptive. And they can help to energize and even inspire. So I hope that's what I can do. But then, as a community, I mean, I can feel it. It's palpable. The bond or the bonds between persons in this gathering today, which I pray is a blessed gathering. And we can help to recharge our batteries. But then I always talk about reconnecting with my Creator. So faith, family, friends, but also self-care as well. And knowing when to have a digital detox, for example. And not making yourself available, but making yourself unavailable. No, you can't connect with me. You can't contact me. Because I need to heal, I need to recover, I need to regenerate. And knowing that sanctuary, all of you have a sanctuary, all of you have a safe space. I know my safe space. I know my sanctuary. It's my beloved Crystal Palace in southeast London in the UK. That's my safe space. And it's not because I support the Eagles, because I'm a Red Devil supporter, but because there's a lake over there. I know there's a lake over there. And that lake is my sacred place. And I just walk around the lake by myself. Rumination is it's like when you have a broken record player in your mind and you have the same thought or scenario again and again. People often ask me, it's a type of overthinking. How do you break that vicious overthinking cycle? And if your focus is in your internal world, that's a recipe, that's disastrous because you're ruminating. But if you immerse yourself in nature and you shift your focus from your internal world to your external world, that's how you break the overthinking cycle. And so I hope that in a way answers your question, because then you can recharge your batteries and you can be energized and hopefully even inspired.
Thank you for that. We're not done yet, because now I want to open the floor up for questions. Please do share where you're from. and keep your questions brief so that we can get through as many questions as possible. This is also an invitation kepada teman-teman yang bersama kami di dalam talian. So those of you who are watching online, you're also able to ask questions, and I believe we have team members from Yayasan Hasanah who will be reading the questions for you. Okay, so who would like to take the honors for the first question? Or everyone is sort of like spellbound and shell-shocked. Okay, the gentleman at the back.
How do you measure success? Like, how do you measure whether the work, the advocacy work you're doing is going in the right direction?
Thank you for asking that important question. So we have different metrics. So let's say my end goal or the outcome measure is stigma rejection, stigma reduction. And so what I do is, for example, in a gathering like this, I would invite participants to complete a validated psychometric stigma scale. And then we would collect data. And then we would have, like, after the intervention, after the talk, we'd administer that same validated psychometric stigma scale. And that's what we've done. And that's how I've been able to deliver my talks, not only nationally, but internationally, because I've got data. And you need that. You need this data because when you go to, initially it was self-funded, my Wounded Healer talk, because there's stigma attached to stigma research. If I went to a university or a pharmaceutical company, I said, I want to conduct research on this new psychiatric drug, they will fund me. But when I go up to a university or a funding body and say, I need some financial support to roll out this anti-stigma intervention, they don't care, they're not interested. Usually that tends to be the case. But if I have data and say, well, look, we have some data that proves that this anti-stigma intervention is effective, then that we can measure the change. I think that, and I hope that answers your question to a degree, kind of. I mean, because stigma rejection is advocacy, isn't it? We're saying that there's no health without mental health. We're saying that more than 1% of the health budget needs to be allocated for the provision of mental health care services. Because at the moment, 1% of the budget in Malaysia, and that's an example of disparity of esteem. That's stigma at the level of policy. And that needs to change. And so when you say, okay, well, here are some of the stigma rejection initiatives that we have launched, and we have some data that supports that these stigma rejection initiatives are effective, I think maybe that's at least a good start. I'm hoping it's a good start. So that would be my response to your question. You're welcome.
I like the fact that you mentioned stigma attached to stigma research.
Oh, yeah, there is.
Next, do we have any other questions? Perhaps one from the back, beside the nasi lemak results chain team. Anyone from there? Yes. Go ahead.
Some aspects, it's actually religion, or I could say like the interpretation of religion that causes mental health illnesses. Having strict parents that want you to act or behave or do something because of the interpretation of Islam, for example. So I'm just wondering, in that case, where Islam can be used, or religion can be used as a tool to cope, how would you advise navigating that kind of confusing realm where you have people that have different interpretations and so on?
Thank you, Ibrahim, for attending and for asking that important question. Me and Ibrahim have been following each other for years on social media, and We met in person for the first time here in Kuala Lumpur. Right, yeah. So KL, where all your dreams come true. Including meeting Ibrahim, or Ibs, affectionately known as Ibs. So I think you make a very important point, because usually religion is conflated with culture. You remind me of this sheikh. He's a revert. He was inspired by Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, Malcolm X. And he said that he's glad that he met Islam before he met Muslims. Which I thought was interesting. Because no, you're right. I mean, as Muslims, we shouldn't be, I think, harsh towards our children. It's the opposite. We should be gentle and tender and understanding. But I mean, obviously, don't get me wrong. I know that we have to instill discipline. I get that. But as you rightly said, I think the interpretation of Islam can be harmful for younger people and for our mental health as well. And it's interesting because there's another revert. I forgot his name. He's a professor of mathematics in Kansas, in the US. Jeffrey Lang? That's him. Do you remember that video that he created about like when he reverted and people kept on telling him about rules, prohibitions. And like only 2% of the Quran is actually devoted to rules and prohibitions. And like 98% is like devoted to ethics and being a good citizen, being a good father, being a good husband, being a good wife. I thought that was really powerful because when you talk about rules and prohibitions, don't do this, don't do that, you're pushing people away, aren't you? Whereas actually most of the Quran, according to Professor Jeffrey Lang, is actually about adab, about ethics, about contributing to our communities and making this world a better place to live in. Better that they come. Okay, they might not be wearing the hijab, they might be wearing a piercing, but better that they come to our gatherings than they don't come to our gatherings at all. So I hope that kind of answers your question, Ibrahim, because it's a very important question that you ask and a point that you make, a valid point that you make. And it's concerning because we had a look at the data recently, didn't we, yesterday? The mental health of younger people. Our younger people are suffering. They are suicidal. They are suffering with major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder. There are body image issues, self-harm. We need to be emotionally available. We need to be compassionate and caring towards them. And being harsh is going to push them away. And our Iman teaches us to be kind and to be respectful. Thank you for asking that question, Ibrahim.
Thank you. Yes, we have a question in front here. Maybe you'd like to give the KJ.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Kyrie, KJ. Thank you, Ahmed, for another wonderful session. And I recorded a podcast with Ahmed yesterday. It's coming out, and please listen to that. Ahmed, I wanted to talk to you about high-functioning mental disorder. You spoke about people who hit rock bottom, who suffer in silence, but there are also people who don't hit rock bottom.
Yeah.
And I'm speaking from a position where I think I'm experiencing this.
Yeah.
And that's high functioning.
Yes.
Mental disorder. People who function at the highest level. So it's not rock bottom. You're flying high. You're flying high. And you don't know that something is wrong.
Yeah.
And you told me yesterday that those who are flying high, high functioning, having a mental illness, it ends up being quite bad because...
Catastrophic.
Yeah, the distance from flying high to rock bottom is much further.
Like Icarus.
Like Icarus, than if you are at the depths of your despair.
Yes.
So maybe you can share with us, and I think many of us go throughout our lives performing well in our careers, pursuing pathways which lead us to success, but we carry with us something, some of us, maybe all of us, a reservoir of despair.
Yes.
That comes knocking on our door one day. So what are the signs that we look out for? How can we tell ourselves, look, things may look well, you're functioning well, you're a high-functioning person, but actually there's something else there. And how do we deal with it?
Yes.
And get help?
Thank you, Khairi. Thank you. People often ask me, with the ubiquity of stigma, mental health related stigma, how do we fight it? And we begin with the human heart. There's no better place than the human heart. But we need top-down and we need bottom-up approaches. And by Khairi being so honest, open, and transparent about his mental health experiences, that's how we reject the stigma. So I want to thank you, Khairi, for your leadership. Jazakallah khair. I mean, high-functioning depression is an example. It's real. It exists. High-functioning depression is an example. It's real, and it exists. The mind mounts different defense mechanisms. One of them is denial. And we can internalize public stigma and develop something called self-stigma, and we can be ashamed, and we can, as I said, be in denial. We don't accept that we actually have a mental health condition, that we are suffering. How does that manifest? You can be cranky, you can be irritable, you can be argumentative, and your reaction to the stimulus is disproportionate. Can you relate to that? Somebody may have said something and then you have like a meltdown. Or you snap or you shout, and you're not usually like this. You're usually a mild-mannered, softly spoken person. And that's how that's how psychological distress can manifest itself. It's not like so obvious, like command auditory hallucinations. You're hearing voices, you're seeing these terrifying visions. You're swinging on the chandeliers, you're doing cartwheels. No, it can be more subtle than that. I tweeted once, just because someone is functioning, it doesn't mean that they're not suffering with their mental health. And just because someone is suffering with their mental health, it doesn't mean that they can't function. The beauty and power of therapy, and I can't emphasize this enough, the beauty and power of therapy is that it provides us with an insight into our personality structure. What are our strengths? What are our vulnerabilities? It's not only to heal psychological wounds. Also, it can help us to unlock our potential. And I was speaking with Khairi about this on his podcast yesterday. For example, the All Blacks, a small country, the All Blacks, New Zealand national rugby team. How can a small country in the Southern Hemisphere dominate world rugby for so long? And so they recruited a consultant psychiatrist who was also a psychologist, who helped them to tap into that potential, that locked potential. And that's what seeing a psychotherapist can do. They can help you to realize your potential. They can empower you to develop a deeper insight into your personality structure, your vulnerabilities, and your strengths. But there's also so much unresolved trauma, usually from adverse childhood experiences. And that continues to influence our mental health, our interpersonal relationships, and our functioning. So, to emphasize and to summarize, an example of a mental health condition where you can be high functioning is high functioning depression, major depressive disorder. And it can manifest in a more subtle way. Maybe it's more socially acceptable than responding to non-apparent stimuli, like having a conversation with these auditory hallucinations. Maybe that's more socially acceptable. But when you see that you're more irritable and argumentative and cranky, and that your reaction is disproportionate to the stimulus, that's when the alarm bells should start ringing. And that's when you should start considering seeking help. Because in the same way that Mo Salah, the Egyptian king who plays for Liverpool Football Club, would go to a physiotherapist if he sprained his ankle, there should be no hesitation whatsoever that you go to a psychotherapist if you sustained an injury of your mind. So I hope that answers your question, KJ, and I'm so glad that you asked it. Jazakallah khair.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. Sebab tadi dia dah. Okay.
Thank you, Professor Dr. Ahmed Hankir. I've heard so much about you. Your book inspired 2 podcasts that I've done with BFM. This is really amazing. And I love the title, Breakthrough. I did have a fair bit of a growing up childhood adversity. And what I've learned about that is that when you come from such place, that it's almost as if, there's this story whereby people assume that you have trauma. People assume that you will seek validation. People assume that you have some sort of mental health condition. But the thing is not. I think quite a lot of experiences, not all the things that you go through, when you take offense in something, it's not a trigger. It's just a human response. For example, a lot of the things that you do, for example, when you seek friendship, and not everyone who is very confident is a narcissist. Or overconfident for that matter.
Well, that's become gendered, I think. If a lady is confident, then she is is she arrogant or narcissistic? Whereas if it's a man, he's confident.
Exactly.
So I think that's gendered.
So my point being is that and with regards to what people, and it's the labels that we put on people.
Well, I don't like labels.
And for example, people call strawberry generation, and for example, I come across one of my really young nieces who was wearing glasses when she doesn't need it, because she really wants to wear glasses. It's like, it's almost as if like there's a generation that I really want to have mental health, mental health issue, because it's cool. Do you see where I'm coming from?
Do you know Stephen Fry? He's like the national treasure in England. So he had like this documentary, The Secret Life of the Manic Depressive, and then following the release of the documentary, people started diagnosing themselves with bipolar affective disorder. This is happening a lot with neurodivergence, by the way. I'm ADHD, I'm ASD. Okay, have you had a formal... You know how many patients I have in my clinic, in my urgent psychiatric consultation service? I have ASD, doctor. I'm autistic. Okay, so when would you formally diagnose with autism? And the danger of this is that you trivialize autistic spectrum disorder. So I think we have to be careful and cautious, because we shouldn't psychopathologize the expression of human emotion. I get that. Can't I just be exuberant instead of manic? Can't I just be melancholic instead of, depressed? No, I get that. But sometimes it takes seeing a mental health care professional to be able to distinguish between the two. So, and also once you've got that label, you can no longer be angry. Because if you express your emotions, like if you're happy, oh, he's manic. Or if you're sad, oh, he's depressed. So that label sticks and you can't really shake it off. And I don't use labels. I know people find it helpful. You have to ask the individual. But personally, I don't use labels. I'm more descriptive. I know what it's like to, for example, succumb to despair. I know what it's like to experience profound oscillations in mood. I get that. I prefer to use descriptive terms. But I think I understand your points, that we need to not psychopathologize the expression of human emotion, and also we shouldn't just be diagnosing ourselves with these mental disorders, because that can be harmful.
Thank you. And it appears that on that note, that's all the time that we have today. He's not going anywhere yet, so you can ask more questions after this. But if I may, allow me to just do a quick recap of all the different things that we've discussed. We started the 38th ILMU Hasanah session with Dr. Anwar talking about high quality, no wrong turns, trust and flexibility, teaching values through anecdotes, and always having a student-centered approach. And I think today we've been able to appreciate and celebrate each other through all that, through an individual-centered approach, learning together as we try and make sense of the breakthroughs that we need to do in our lives. We started with talking about what does it mean when we feel so overwhelmed, when the isolation and despair is so deep, when it's not possible, in fact, that depression or despair is not only possible, it's probable. We spoke about guilt that often immobilizes us, and how social connectivity and lifestyle intervention is something that we should also seek for. We spoke about the power of listening, on insights, kindness, and empathy, what it means to humanize the person living with a mental health condition, how we help to identify and engage them. We spoke about let's reject stigma, not just label people, but look beyond that. We talked about better accountability of not only corporates, but also agents of change. We spoke about how to connect both the mind, overwhelming, overthinking, and finding back peace within ourselves. We had questions on gamification, on divine intervention, on high functioning mental disorders. And at the end, we came back to let's all begin with the human heart. Top down, bottom up, everyone together leaning in. How does this manifest in the end? Just because someone is functioning does not mean that they are not suffering. And just because they are suffering does not mean they are not functioning. And I dare to add, just because of this does not mean we cannot all thrive together. So thank you for your time. And thank you, Dr. Hankir, for your session. And now we're going to hand it over to Yes and Hasanah. Thank you.
What a fantastic closing. Thank you so much. And